The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as the officer yanked open the heavy oak doors, driving a woman in handcuffs behind him. His grip was firm, his posture confident. After all, he was certain he had done his job right. Another arrest, another criminal off the streets. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the woman he had just paraded into the courthouse like a common offender was about to turn his entire world upside down. Just minutes earlier, Officer Ryan Carter had responded to a routine call. At least, that's what he had thought. A report of a disorderly woman at a downtown cafe. Witnesses claimed she had been arguing with a man in a suit, and when asked to leave, she had refused, insisting she had a right to be there. Ryan had heard it all before: disruptive behavior, an entitled attitude, people thinking they were above the law. He had no patience for it. When he arrived, he saw her, well-dressed, composed, and holding her ground in a way that irritated him. He asked for her ID. She refused. She wasn't belligerent, but she was firm. "You're making a mistake," she had said, calm but unshaken. But Ryan wasn't interested in a debate. She was uncooperative, and as far as he was concerned, that meant one thing: arrest. He cuffed her, read her rights, and escorted her to the patrol car. She didn't resist, didn't even argue. That should have been the first clue, but Ryan was too caught up in what he thought was just another day in law enforcement. Now, standing before the judge, he kept his grip on her arm as he addressed the courtroom. "Your Honor, we have a case of public disturbance, refusal to comply, and..." "Officer." The judge's voice cut through the room like a blade, cold and sharp. "Do you have any idea who you've just arrested?" Ryan frowned, glancing down at the woman. She still wasn't panicked. No pleading, no outrage, just quiet, unshaken confidence. He didn't like it. "She refused to identify herself," Ryan stated, "caused a scene in a public space, and..." "That woman," the judge interrupted, leaning forward with a look of disbelief, "is Chief Federal Prosecutor Evelyn Grant." Silence. Ryan's stomach dropped. A dull ringing filled his ears. He blinked at the woman in his grasp, suddenly aware of the sheer stillness in the room. Chief Federal Prosecutor. No, that wasn't possible. If that were true. His mind raced, replaying the arrest, the moments leading up to it. The warning she had given him, the way she hadn't resisted, hadn't even flinched when he put the cuffs on her. Evelyn Grant turned her head slightly, looking at him now with the kind of expression he had seen before, but never directed at him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something worse. It was the look of a woman who knew that, in just a few minutes, everything was about to change. And for Officer Ryan Carter, it was only the beginning of a nightmare he never saw coming. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. The words echoed in his mind: Chief Federal Prosecutor. The courtroom was dead silent, all eyes fixed on him, waiting for a reaction, but he had none. He couldn't process what was happening fast enough. He had made arrests before, plenty of them. Some people claimed they were innocent, some threw around names, threatened to call their lawyers. But this was different. Evelyn Grant hadn't just been bluffing. And now, standing in front of the judge, still in handcuffs, she didn't have to say a word. The weight of who she was did all the talking. Ryan swallowed hard. He had to say something, but his throat felt dry. He could already feel the shift in power, like the ground beneath him wasn't solid anymore. Moments ago, he had been sure that she was just another citizen who'd thought they were above the rules. But now, doubt slithered into his mind, wrapping tight around his confidence. The judge exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Officer Carter, uncuff her. Now." Ryan hesitated, but one sharp look from the judge sent his hands into motion. He reached for his key, fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked the cuffs. They clicked open, and Evelyn rubbed her wrists, her expression unreadable. She didn't lash out. She didn't demand an apology. She simply took a slow breath, adjusted the sleeves of her coat, and met his eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth, unwavering. She didn't look at Ryan again as she stepped forward, her posture straight, her presence commanding. She didn't need to argue her case. Everyone already knew who she was. Ryan's face burned. He wanted to disappear. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the kind of mistake that could ruin him. "Ms. Grant," the judge said, his voice softer now, careful, "I sincerely apologize for this situation." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, considering her words. "I understand mistakes happen, Your Honor." She glanced at Ryan then, just for a second, before looking back at the judge. "But some mistakes carry more weight than others." The judge nodded grimly. "Indeed." He turned back to Ryan. "Officer Carter, I suggest you take a moment to reflect on the gravity of this situation." Ryan stiffened, nodding mechanically, but his mind was spinning. This wasn't just a routine arrest gone wrong. This was about to become something much, much bigger. Evelyn took a step back, lifting her bag from where it had been placed on a nearby table. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if deciding what should happen next. Then, without another word, she walked out of the courtroom. Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. He felt the stares of the courtroom on him, the weight of the mistake settling deeper in his chest. But one question gnawed at the back of his mind. If she was the Chief Federal Prosecutor, what had she been doing at that cafe? And why had she been arguing with that man in the suit? Something about this wasn't adding up. He should have just walked away, let it be, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a wrongful arrest. And as he left the courtroom that day, he had no idea that the truth was far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Ryan barely made it out of the courthouse before the weight of what had just happened hit him full force. The city air was thick with the scent of rain, the streets damp from an earlier storm. He stood on the steps for a moment, hands on his hips, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling twisting in his gut. He knew he had screwed up, badly, but something about the entire situation didn't sit right. It wasn't just that he had arrested the wrong woman, it was the way she had handled it. Too calm, too controlled, like she knew this was coming. Most people, innocent or not, would have protested, made a scene, or at least demanded an apology. But Evelyn Grant, she had barely reacted. Ryan pulled out his phone, searching her name. Articles popped up instantly, headlines about high-profile cases, federal crackdowns, even a few interviews where she spoke about justice and accountability. She had a reputation for being relentless, fearless, and absolutely unforgiving when it came to corruption. So what was she doing at that cafe? And why had she been arguing with that man? The man. Ryan replayed the scene in his head. He had barely glanced at the guy during the arrest, dismissing him as just another bystander. But now he realized that the argument hadn't seemed random. The man had been tense, shifting uncomfortably as Evelyn spoke. And then, when Ryan arrested her, the man had disappeared without a word. Ryan's gut told him that was no coincidence. He ran a search on the cafe, looking for any possible connections. It was an upscale place, the kind of spot where business deals happened over expensive coffee and quiet conversations. But nothing stood out, until he dug a little deeper. 3 weeks ago, a local news site had reported that the cafe had been visited by federal investigators. No details, no follow-up, just a brief mention that officials had been seen entering the building and speaking to the manager. Ryan frowned. Could Evelyn have been there on official business? If so, why hadn't she identified herself right away? He needed answers. His first instinct was to go back to the cafe, see if he could track down the man Evelyn had been arguing with. But something told him that wasn't the best move. Not yet. Instead, he decided to start with someone who might know more. 15 minutes later, Ryan pulled into the parking lot of the precinct. He walked inside, the familiar scent of stale coffee and old paperwork filling the air. He spotted Officer Daniels at his desk, typing away at his computer. Daniels had been on the force longer than most, the kind of guy who had an ear to the ground on just about everything. If something was happening in the city, he either knew about it or could find out. Ryan leaned against the desk. "Hey, got a second?" Daniels glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Depends. You're here to tell me you finally learned how to write a proper report." Ryan smirked, but it faded fast. "I need some info. About a woman. Chief Federal Prosecutor Evelyn Grant." That got Daniels' full attention. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Heard about what happened in court. You really stepped in it, huh?" Ryan sighed. "Yeah, I got that part. But something's off. I need to know why she was at that cafe today." Daniel's expression shifted, his usual amusement replaced by something more serious. "That's not a name you want to start digging into, Carter." Ryan frowned. "Why?" Daniels glanced around, lowering his voice. "Grant's been on a warpath lately. Word is, she's been working on a big case. Something federal, and not just the usual corporate fraud or money laundering stuff." Ryan's grip on the desk tightened. Then why was she arguing with some guy in a suit in the middle of a cafe? Daniels exhaled, shaking his head. "I don't know. But if she was there, it wasn't random." He hesitated. "And if she didn't want to identify herself to you, maybe she had a reason." Ryan processed that. Evelyn hadn't fought the arrest, hadn't corrected him. It was almost like she had wanted to be taken in, or at least she had expected it. That thought unsettled him more than anything. "Look," Daniels said, lowering his voice even more. "If I were you, I'd let this go. Grant's got enemies. Powerful ones. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of this." Ryan nodded like he agreed, but in his mind, he knew he wasn't letting this go. If anything, he was just getting started. That night, he sat in his apartment, scrolling through news articles, trying to find any link between Evelyn and recent investigations. He found mentions of an ongoing case, something involving high-profile officials, financial crimes, potential corruption. The details were vague, but one thing was clear. Evelyn was after someone big. And Ryan had just walked straight into the middle of it. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, "Carter." A pause. Then a woman's voice. Smooth, controlled. "Still looking into me, officer." Ryan froze. It was her. Evelyn Grant. Before he could respond, she continued, "I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Whatever you think you're doing, stop." The line went dead. Ryan stared at his phone, heart pounding. She knew. And that meant he was closer to the truth than he realized. Ryan sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call had ended. Evelyn Grant had just called him. That meant two things. One, she was watching him. And two, whatever he had stumbled into was bigger than he'd realized. His first instinct was to drop it, to listen to her warning and walk away. But he knew himself too well. That wasn't going to happen. Not when every part of him was screaming that something wasn't right. He stared at the city lights outside his window, his mind racing. Evelyn had been too calm, just like she had been in the courtroom. She wasn't worried about him, she was worried about something else. Or someone else. Ryan pulled up the number on his phone, considering calling back, but he knew she wouldn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. The cafe was closed by the time he got there, its windows dark, chairs stacked on tables. He parked down the street, keeping his distance, watching. He didn't know what he was expecting to see, but his gut told him this place held answers. Movement caught his eye. A figure stepped out from the alley beside the cafe, looking around cautiously before slipping into a sleek black car. Ryan squinted, trying to make out the face, but the streetlights only gave him a partial view. Dark suit, short cropped hair. Something about the way the man moved was familiar. Then it hit him. It was the man Evelyn had been arguing with earlier that day. Ryan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He needed to know who this guy was. He tailed the car at a distance, keeping his headlights dimmed. The driver moved fast, weaving through traffic like someone who didn't want to be followed. Ryan kept his pace steady, careful not to get too close. After 15 minutes, the car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a tall glass office building. Ryan drove past without slowing down, pulling over a block away. He got out and walked back, keeping to the shadows. The entrance to the garage was secured, card access only, but the lobby of the building was still open. Ryan stepped inside, shaking off the rain from his jacket. A security guard sat at a desk, barely paying attention. The walls were lined with framed photos of executives and high-ranking officials, their names etched on plaques beneath them. Ryan's eyes scanned the names, searching for something, anything, that would give him a clue. Then he saw it. Robert Langley, CEO. Ryan's stomach turned. He knew that name. Langley had been under federal investigation for months, suspected of laundering money through a network of high-end businesses, including real estate and private clubs. No charges had been filed, but rumors swirled that the feds were closing in. And now, Evelyn Grant had been seen arguing with one of his people. Ryan turned back toward the security desk. "Excuse me," he said casually. "I'm supposed to meet Mr. Langley's assistant, but I think I left my badge in the car. Mind reminding me what floor he's on?" The guard barely looked up. "Top floor, but no one's there at this hour." Ryan nodded in thanks and walked back outside, his mind racing. If Evelyn had been investigating Langley, that meant she was close to something big. And if she had refused to identify herself at the cafe, maybe it wasn't because she was testing him. Maybe it was because she didn't want to blow her cover. Ryan exhaled sharply. He needed to talk to her. Not over the phone, not in a courthouse, face to face. But as he turned back toward his car, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, "Carter." A different voice this time. Male. Cold. "You're asking too many questions." Ryan's chest tightened. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He turned instinctively, scanning the street. No one, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a black SUV parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine running. Ryan didn't wait. He turned and walked in the opposite direction, keeping his pace even. He wasn't sure if they would follow, but he wasn't going to stick around to find out. One thing was clear now. Whoever Evelyn was after, they already knew his name. And that meant he was running out of time. Ryan kept walking, forcing himself not to look back. The city felt different now, the streets somehow darker, the air heavier. Every step he took, he expected to hear footsteps behind him. Every car that passed made his pulse quicken. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a bad arrest anymore. This was something bigger, something that people were willing to keep quiet at any cost. He turned a corner, ducking into a convenience store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he grabbed a water bottle and made his way to the back. Through the glass cooler doors, he watched the street outside. The black SUV was still there, parked just far enough away to avoid suspicion. Whoever was inside wasn't making a move. Not yet. Ryan pulled out his phone, his fingers hovering over Evelyn Grant's number. He hesitated. She had warned him to stop. She had practically spelled it out for him. Whatever was going on, it was dangerous. But if he was already being watched, it was too late to back out now. He stepped outside, keeping his eyes straight ahead as he made his way toward his car. But just as he reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He sighed, answering without stopping. "Carter." This time the voice was familiar. Evelyn. But something was different. Her tone wasn't calm. It wasn't controlled. It was sharp, urgent. "You need to get off the street. Now." Ryan's stomach tightened. "I know I'm being followed." "It's not just you," she said quickly. "They've been watching me too. And if they know you're involved, that means—" A loud screech interrupted her words. Tires skidding. Ryan turned just in time to see another car, silver sedan, no plates, barreling toward him. He barely had time to react. Instinct took over. He threw himself to the ground just as the car rushed past, missing him by inches. His shoulder hit the pavement hard, but he ignored the pain, rolling to his feet as the Satan disappeared down the street. People nearby had stopped, some staring, a few pulling out their phones. The black SUV was gone. Ryan's breathing was ragged as he pressed the phone back to his ear. "Evelyn. Get to the federal building," she said. "Level 3 parking garage. 20 minutes. Then she hung up. Ryan stood there for a second, heart pounding, before shaking off the shock. Someone had just tried to kill him. No more warnings, no more subtle threats. They were done playing. He got in his car, gripping the wheel as he sped toward the federal building. Rain started to fall, blurring the city lights as he weaved through traffic. His mind raced. If Evelyn was being watched too, then whoever was behind this wasn't just after him. This was bigger than one case, bigger than one investigation. By the time he pulled into the underground parking garage, his nerves were raw. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of her. The garage was dimly lit, mostly empty, the hum of the overhead lights the only sound. Then he saw her. Evelyn stood near a concrete pillar, her arms crossed, her expression tight. Ryan got out, shutting the door behind him. "Talk." She exhaled, glancing around before stepping closer. "I told you to stop digging." "You knew that wasn't going to happen," he shot back. "Now someone just tried to run me down, and I need to know why." She hesitated for only a second, then nodded. "Fine, but after this, you're in. No turning back." Ryan met her gaze. "I think that decision was made for me." Evelyn pulled a folder from her bag, handing it to him. "Robert Langley isn't just laundering money. He's funding something bigger, something dangerous." Ryan opened the folder. His stomach dropped. The photos inside showed high-profile officials, judges, politicians, even law enforcement officers. Some were shaking hands with Langley. Others were caught in what looked like secret meetings. The last photo sent a chill down his spine. It was Daniels, his colleague, his friend, standing next to Langley, speaking in hushed tones. Ryan looked up at Evelyn, his jaw tight. "You're telling me this goes all the way up?" She nodded. "And we just made ourselves their biggest problem." A sound echoed through the garage. A car door slamming. Footsteps. Ryan and Evelyn locked eyes. They weren't alone. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears as he turned toward the sound. Footsteps echoed through the dimly lit parking garage, slow and deliberate. He exchanged a glance with Evelyn, both of them silently coming to the same conclusion: they had been followed. Evelyn slipped the folder back into her bag, her posture tense but controlled. Ryan, on the other hand, felt his fists clench. He had been through enough tonight. Someone had tried to run him off the road. Someone had warned him to back off. And now someone had tracked them down here. A shadow stretched along the concrete floor as a figure emerged from behind a parked SUV. Ryan's breath hitched. Daniels. The same Daniels who had warned him to stop digging. The same Daniels who had been in the photo, standing next to Langley. Ryan's mind reeled. This was his friend. A guy he had trusted for years. A guy he had gone out for beers with after long shifts. And now he was standing here, his hand resting near his holster, his expression unreadable. "Ryan," Daniels said, his voice careful, controlled. "I need you to listen to me." Ryan stepped in front of Evelyn, his stance firm. "You lied to me." Daniels sighed, shaking his head. "I didn't lie. I told you to drop it. I told you it was bigger than you. You should have listened." Ryan's jaw tightened. And what? Let Langley keep buying off judges. Let him keep laundering money for people who'd rather see us dead than exposed. Daniel's gaze flickered to Evelyn. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Evelyn's voice was ice cold. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with." A tense silence stretched between them. Daniels looked like he was weighing something in his mind. Then finally, he exhaled. I tried to keep you out of this, he said, his voice softer now. I tried to protect you. Ryan scoffed. Protect me? You had me running in circles while Langley's guys were making moves. You knew exactly what I was walking into. Daniel's eyes darkened. You don't get it, Ryan. This isn't just about money. It's not just about corruption. Langley's operation runs deep, real deep. You think I wanted to be involved? You think I had a choice? Ryan took a slow step forward. There's always a choice. Daniel's fingers twitched near his holster, but he didn't pull his weapon. For a brief moment, Ryan saw something in his eyes, regret. Then Evelyn spoke. It's over, Daniels. She reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. She tapped the screen once, then turned it toward him. A red light blinked. A live recording. You just admitted everything. Daniel's face paled. His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering. This has been streaming to a secure channel for the last 2 minutes. That means Langley just lost his leverage. And whatever he's been holding over you, it's worthless now. Ryan could see the gears turning in Daniel's head. He was trapped, he knew it. Then, something unexpected happened. Daniels let out a shaky breath and laughed. A bitter, broken laugh. You have no idea what you've done. Evelyn's expression didn't change. I know exactly what I've done. Daniels shook his head, still laughing under his breath. Then, without warning, he raised his hands. Slowly. Fine, he said. Then arrest me. Ryan hesitated for half a second, then reached for his cuffs. As he stepped forward, Daniels met his gaze. But Ryan, he said quietly, you should know something. Ryan snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. What? Daniels leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. Langley isn't the one in charge. Ryan's blood ran cold. Before he could respond, the sound of sirens filled the parking garage. Evelyn had called in backup. Within moments, agents swarmed to space, guns drawn, orders shouted. Daniels didn't resist as they took him. Ryan stepped back, his mind still replaying what Daniels had said. Langley isn't the one in charge. Evelyn was already on the phone, giving orders, making sure the recording had been secured. When she hung up, she met Ryan's gaze. It's done, she said. Ryan exhaled. No, he murmured, still lost in thought. It's not. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded, she knew. They had won this battle, but the war? It was just beginning. Ryan stood in the parking garage long after Daniels had been taken away, the echoes of sirens fading into the night. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him. The case wasn't just about one corrupt businessman laundering money. It wasn't just about a few bribes and backroom deals. It was deeper, much deeper. And Daniel's final words wouldn't leave his mind. Langley isn't the one in charge. Evelyn was quiet beside him, arms crossed, watching him carefully. She had seen it too, the way Daniels had almost seemed relieved when the cuffs went on. He knew something they didn't, and whatever it was, it scared him. Finally, Ryan let out a breath and ran a hand down his face. I need to know what he meant. Evelyn nodded. We will. Ryan turned to her. You're staying on this, aren't you? She gave him a small smirk. You think I'd walk away now? Ryan huffed a short laugh. He should have known better. She had been 2 steps ahead from the moment they met. But he wasn't the same cop who had dragged her into court thinking she was just another defendant. He had learned a lot in the last 24 hours. As much as he wanted to keep pushing, to dig deeper right now, exhaustion was creeping in. His shoulder still throbbed from hitting the pavement earlier, and the weight of everything that had happened was starting to settle in his bones. Evelyn seemed to sense it. Get some rest, Carter. You're going to need it. He wanted to argue, but she was right. This wasn't over, but for tonight, it had to be. He nodded and started toward his car. As he opened the door, he looked back at her. You know, for a Chief Federal Prosecutor, you don't play by the rules much. She smiled. Rules don't mean much when the people breaking them are the ones making them. Ryan shook his head, amused despite everything. He got into his car, gripping the wheel. His whole world had shifted in the span of a day. But one thing was certain, he wasn't done yet. The next morning, Ryan sat in his apartment, scrolling through the news. Daniel's arrest had already made headlines. The articles painted him as a dirty cop, a willing accomplice in Langley's operation, but Ryan knew better. Daniels had been caught in something bigger, something he had no way out of. His phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. ***, turn on the news ***. Ryan grabbed the remote and flipped to the local station. His stomach tightened as he saw the headline. ***, Robert Langley found dead in holding cell. Suspected suicide ***. Ryan leaned forward, gripping the remote tighter. Langley was supposed to be facing trial. He was supposed to be the key to exposing everything. And now, just like that, he was gone. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Evelyn. ***, this wasn't suicide ***. Ryan knew she was right. Langley had been silenced. And if he had been taken out that quickly, it meant whoever was really in charge wasn't wasting time. They were cleaning up loose ends. Daniel's voice echoed in his mind. ***, Langley isn't the one in charge ***. Ryan stood up, already grabbing his jacket. He wasn't going to let this go. Someone had wanted him to stop asking questions. They had tried threats. They had tried fear. Now they were trying to erase the evidence. But it was too late for that. He wasn't the same cop he had been yesterday. He wasn't chasing the wrong suspects anymore. Now he knew where to look. And he wasn't going to stop until he found the real power behind all of this. As he stepped outside into the crisp morning air, he knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning.